done that, and as others continue to join the event, please type your favorite color in the chat box. It'll help us know who is ready to start our event. My name is Jacelyn, and this is my partner, Mara, who we are from the Noble County Pulse Youth Pod. We have a few housekeeping things we want to go over with you. First, we are recording this event so that you can share with others who are not able to participate live with us today.
You'll be placed on mute to cut down the background noise. Please use the chat box to share questions and comments about today's presentations. We will monitor the chat box so we do not miss out anything because we understand the importance of effective communication.
Raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature. If you have a question or you want to ask out loud or want to make a comment out loud, to do this, click the participants at the bottom of your screen and it will give you an option to raise your hand or give you a thumbs up reminder. If you have this feature, we will call on you so that you can share out loud. So for today's agenda, we have speakers lined up that include current, former Youth Pod members, college students who are studying philanthropy, and other adults who are working in philanthropy. We will include time for questions and comments during the breakouts. Plus, we have opportunities to demonstrate your participation in today's event. So for today's participation opportunity so far, how we offer one of these opportunities right now, this is a multiple choice question, and if you use the chat box to submit your answer, the first person with the correct answer will be sent a gift. We have people monitoring the chat box.
You want to do that now? Huh? Do you want to do that?
We're going to let a few more people in, and then we'll say the question.
You're doing that question?
Hi.
Are you guys ready for the participation question? How do lobsters communicate with one another? Do they touch their antennas together? Do they pee at each other, tap on each other's tail, or dance around each other? And you can submit your answer in the chat box. The correct answer is pee at each other. Gross, I know. So the first person to submit the answer was correct was Angola Fist. And we will contact you guys after the event today to get you guys your prize.
Now let us move on to our event and the reason why we all joined today. Now we would like to welcome Pam Clark and Jill Gordon.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I know that we have a lot to get to today, so Mara and Jacqueline, are we ready to do our presentation?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the screen real quick and show PowerPoint. Okay. So my name is Jill Gordon, and I am with Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. That's what the initials are for. Mara and Jacqueline, can I get a thumbs up if you can see the PowerPoint? All right, perfect. So Pamela and I are going to talk about careers in philanthropy, and I'm going to have the short portion of the presentation and kind of start from a personal place. So I'm from Indiana. I am from actually just south of Chicago, and I came to Indianapolis to go to school where Pamela actually has her job and where she's located. And it's Indiana Philanthropy, or IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. And so I've been in Indianapolis ever since. And just wanted to give you a little bit of a highlight of how my path in life, as a lifelong learner, and I really think life is a journey, a learning journey for all of us, how I got into a career in philanthropy. So you can see I look so cool with these goggles on, but this is my career. My bachelor's degree is in anthropology and museum studies. And I have a master's in museum studies and nonprofit management as well. But this is at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. And so those of you from Indiana and maybe other states have also gone to the world's largest children's museum. It's a really cool place to work. And these silly kids that you see on the screen with the light blue shirts on, those are teenagers from the Museum Apprentice Program. So I spent over 10 years working in museums. I worked in a history museum where I had over 30 volunteers. And that history museum, just south of Indianapolis in Johnson County, Indiana, is where I was introduced to our local community foundation. So just kind of connecting the dots, I didn't know a lot about community foundations and that world. And then I moved on back to the Children's Museum where I had worked as a college student. And I ran this teen program called the Museum Apprentice Program for 13 to 18-year-olds. And that's really where I was introduced to the world of youth philanthropy, because these teens were sharing their time, talent, and treasure. They did activities for individuals coming to the museum, families visiting the museum. They were in a robotics competition. That's what this picture is. And then they also they prepared really cool events like a Renaissance fair. That was really fun. And I was brought in to really revamp this program. Like youth pods, there are like 35 teens in this program, so maybe a little larger than some of your pods, but a lot of similarities there: service projects and sharing their time, talent, and treasure. So what happened is I was asked to be on YIPI, Youth Philanthropy Initiative of Indiana's partner network, representing the Children's Museum. And that's where I got introduced to really this concrete world of youth philanthropy and what it really meant. And I loved it. And so the opportunity to leave the Children's Museum and become the program director of YIPI happened. And that happened in 2011. And for about 7 years, I ran YIPI, which was focused on Indiana, working with a lot of foundations and nonprofits on promoting youth philanthropy. And you see the Phil's Giving Circle here in the middle. Phil and I traveled not only the state of Indiana, but the country to talk about youth philanthropy. Some of you have seen the Phil and his family's Adventures in Giving, kind of a game kit that promotes youth philanthropy. And so I really loved it. It was all about youth development, youth philanthropy. And I worked with, you might see some familiar faces up here, but I worked with adults that had preschool programs. These are a bunch of very sweet little kids that have superheroes because they are superheroes. Every young person is a superhero that can use their time, talent, and treasure. So that's a preschool all the way up to these lovely teenagers from Pulse when we had a youth philanthropy summit in Northeast Indiana. So it was just a wonderful time. And about 3 years ago, I became the director of learning for Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. YIPI was always housed under Indiana Philanthropy Alliance as a special project. And so that's where now I get to do all kinds of educational programming for foundations and giving programs primarily around the state of Indiana. We do have some members that are from other states. So that's where I'm going to end my piece of the presentation, is to say, here's what Indiana Philanthropy Alliance membership looks like. We have 183 members, and that represents, you can see this number here, 1,066 staff members. About 44% of those are coming from community foundations, but then you can see all these member types here. There's corporate foundations, private, family, public. We have some re-granting organizations. And the kind of careers they have, there's everything from leadership roles like the CEO and executive director, administrative and operations directors and managers, those that are running programs for the nonprofits within their communities, governance work, accounting and finance, of course, everyone needs to keep the budgets in line, development, so fundraising individuals, and then you can see here marketing, communications, community engagement. Very importantly, the grant makers within these organizations as well. Often their job role might be a program officer. So this gives you an idea of the types of jobs that our members at Indiana Philanthropy Alliance and foundations across the state of Indiana are holding. And so with that, I'm going to click and hand things over to Pamela.
Thanks, Jill. So welcome, everybody. It's nice to see so many people who are here today interested in learning more about careers in philanthropy. So where Jill had her career in philanthropy, I work at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, which, as Jill mentioned, is on the IUPUI campus. And my job is to help students find careers in philanthropy. And so we have students that come to our school for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they come because they have a cause that they're really passionate about and they don't know what kind of job that they want to get, but they know they want to do something working with that specific cause. And then other times we have people who know, for example, that they really love fundraising and they want to be a fundraiser and they don't know what cause they want to service, but they do know that they want to find a position in fundraising. And so they come to our school to learn about those things. Can anybody name a job that they've heard of that's in the field of philanthropy? We have no takers on that. So there are all kinds of positions. And even if you just think of, oh, here we go, we got a program manager. That's perfect. Yes. So, you know, even this year, we had students who graduated and got all kinds of different positions. So some of them are working on policy to help with social justice issues. So they're interacting with the government. We have some people who are fundraisers for things like universities or libraries or private schools or animal protection agencies, health organizations, youth homes. And we have people who work in foundations. Sometimes they're private family foundations, sometimes they're community foundations. And we even had someone this year who graduated and is the director of the Miami City Ballet. So there, as you can see, there are a whole lot of different types of positions that you can get within the field of philanthropy. And there are also 1.6 million nonprofits. So Jill, if you could move to the next slide for me. Yeah, now we're getting some great positions here in the chat. Thank you, everybody. This slide just shows information about our alumni, so people who graduated from our school and the types of positions that they went into. And as you can see here, fundraising was the most popular one. So that was 33% of our graduates went into fundraising, but there are a variety of other opportunities within the field, including grant making, teaching, being a consultant, running programs. CSR is corporate social responsibility. So sometimes people work in organizations that are more like businesses and they help the community through that. And then if you switch to the next slide for me, Jill, you will see that these are the types of organizations that people wanted to work for. So for example, the largest group from this area was in education, but there are, as you can see, a variety of other types of organizations, from the environment to government to arts and culture, and just like Jill, museums. And so on. So I just wanted to kind of show you that so you could see the variety that's out there and the types of positions and the types of organizations that people want to work for. And now, Jill, if you can stop sharing your screen. I thought that you guys might enjoy doing a Kahoot. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, so you'll want to go to Kahoot it, and you can see the game pin there. And I will wait until people join. Just a few more seconds here to give people time to join. All right, I think we will get started. What organization is represented by this logo? So you can see there, we had quite a few get that one right with United Way. Let's see who can get this one right. Lots of people knew this one. Some changes in who's winning here. So we have a class called Learning by Giving that actually gives money out into the Indianapolis community each year. $10,000. So if you come to the School of Philanthropy and you want to take this class and learn about the needs in the Indianapolis area and actually give a $10,000 check out, you should do that. Let's see if you know this logo. All right. So this is another one of our courses that our students take. It's actually a Giving Tuesday campaign. Kelsey up at the top there. Community Engagement Manager. Kelsey's holding on. Intro to fundraising.
I'm not doing very good. Oh my gosh. It locked me out of the Zoom, so I spent most time getting on. I think I got that one. It's like the only logo that I actually know and recognize.
Few more questions left. It's probably an easy one here.
Macy Webb, Natalie Schaefer, Tabby Henley, Callie Weiss, Brock Shahay, please come to the office.
Almost everybody knew that one. And the last question here. All right. Here are our winners. So hopefully that gave you a few more ideas than you originally had about things that you can do in the field of philanthropy. And I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, Pam and Jill. That was great. I really loved how you guys expressed your connection and strive with youth philanthropy. And I'm looking forward to talking with you in the breakout room. Okay, so it's time for another opportunity for you to participate in another multiple choice question. And remember to use your chat box to submit your answer. The first correct answer will win.
So our second question for today was John Machida Jr. was the fastest talker for decades for his famous appearance on Micro Machines commercials. How many words a minute could he say? 462, 675, 583, or 752? Can you just fill up? $675 Destiny Orange County. No. Oh, that's wrong. Okay. I'm still reading. So the correct answer is 583, and the first person was to get that right was Addison Lindsay from our own Pulse group. So thank you guys for participating, and congratulations. We'll get your contact information after.
Okay, let us continue, and I would like to welcome Kelsey Harrington. And I'm going to read a little bit of her bio. So, Muncie native Kelsey Harrington first joined the George and Frances Ball Foundation as an intern. At various points in high school and college, Kelsey was a janitor, office assistant, event planner, wedding dress stylist, and summer program intern at a community center in Cape Town, South Africa. Upon completing her bachelor's degrees in both business and philanthropic studies at Indiana University for University, Indianapolis, Kelsey stepped into her current role as a program associate at GFBF. At the foundation, she can be found building relationships with nonprofit organizations, gathering local groups to fuel collaboration, designing graphics and press releases, and making recommendations to the board of directors on how to grant more than $5 million each year. Driven by a passion for leveraging, aligning, and mobilizing community assets for greater community prosperity, Kelsey values being able to serve her hometown as part of the GFBF team. And through her role as vice president of the hometown as a part of Muncie Young Professionals, Kelsey is an earning and coffee frantic, the eldest of 6, and enjoys traveling, thrift shopping, collective vintage kitchen gadgets and sweaters, and binge-watching crime shows. So I'll hand it over to you, Kelsey. Take it away.
Thank you. I appreciate that introduction. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Okay, great. Sorry, I just got new headphones for my birthday last week, and so sometimes they give me a little bit of a challenge. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And I will look to you for another thumbs up that you can see a PowerPoint, a green PowerPoint. Can everyone see it? Okay, wonderful. So thank you. So as we get started here, I think I'm leaning on Margarita to issue the first poll question. Is that a go?
Yes, Kelsey, we're going to get it right here.
Perfect, thank you. So just to get to know each other a little bit better here, if you could let me know what you're most looking forward to about the upcoming warmer weather. For some of us, and I know some of us are joining from the South, I actually am working remotely in Florida right now. So I'm down here with you if that's the case, and we have warm weather. So, but for those of you who are up north where I usually am, tell me what you are most looking forward to. And then once we have enough answers, Margarita, are you able to show the results of the poll?
Yes, I'm gonna give it just a couple more seconds.
Perfect.
And here we go.
All right, looks like everyone's just excited for some sunshine, which I can understand. I answered ice cream all day, every day. So, I mean, whether it's, you know, sub-0 degrees in central Indiana or 85 and sunny in Florida, you can find me treating myself to some ice cream. So I'm with the group there who answered that. So I am here today to join you, and thank you for having me, to share about why philanthropy is important. I just want to give a quick shout out to Jill and Pamela. I, as you might have heard in my bio, attended the School of Philanthropy. That was the college that I went to. And so a little piece of me is there, and I'm excited that Pamela joined us. And then also with Jill, my foundation is a member of Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. So when you saw those 47 Family Foundation staff members, I'm one of those 47. And so I'm going to just give a quick background of kind of how I got here before jumping in. So I attended a rural high school in central Indiana in a tiny town called Cowan. And my community did not have any type of youth philanthropy pod or activity, but what we did have was Key Club. And so I don't know if any of your schools also have Key Club, or I think maybe Rotaract is the other similar version of a service club at the high school level. But my high school is 7th through 12th grade. So for 6 years, I participated in Key Club, and it was one of my favorite things that I did, in addition to sports and student council and all types of other things. But I loved it because of the fundraising and service projects that we would do for our community, in the way that we would support our small rural hometown through various activities. So I bring that up to say that as I graduated high school, I pursued a degree in business in Bloomington, Indiana, which if you're from Indiana, you're familiar, but that is the town that hosts the main campus for Indiana University. And is one of the top business schools in the country. So that's what took me there. It's close to home. It was a good school for that particular major. And shortly after being there, like 2 months after being there, I decided to add a degree in philanthropy because it was such a personal passion of mine. So I then transitioned or transferred schools to the Indianapolis campus of Indiana University, and added that second degree. And so all through college, I worked in business-related jobs, as you might have heard in my bio, selling wedding dresses, planning events, et cetera, and volunteering on the side just as a continuation of something I'd always been passionate about. But as I closed in on the end of my college experience and I was looking ahead to what I might do for my career starting off, I actually ended up working in philanthropy. So I thought that the plan I had set out for myself was to work in business and use my philanthropy degree kind of in my personal life. And it turned out going the other way for me, which has been a real blessing. But I bring all of that up to say that the two main topics that I would like to talk about today in this PowerPoint have to do with philanthropy being a key pillar to our personal lives and a key pillar to the well-being of our communities and society. And then last, I just want to wrap up towards the end with a couple of interesting leadership roles that philanthropy takes on that I think might be unexpected. Certainly they were for me. So I'm excited to share about these. I'm going to go ahead and jump into a key pillar to personal well-being as a main reason that philanthropy is important. And so often this is referred to as the joy of giving. And that is what I learned a lot about in the School of Philanthropy. And basically, it's this idea that we all have kind of this natural urge to give and to be generous and helpful to others. And so this quote here is from Philanthropy Roundtable, which is a leader in kind of the philanthropy landscape across the country. But they say it's easy to overlook the fact that philanthropy doesn't just help the recipients, it offers profound life satisfaction to givers as well. It opens up avenues to meaning and happiness and ways of thriving that aren't easily found otherwise. And so I'm sure that you all have personal experiences that make you kind of nod your head and go, yeah, this makes sense. When I give to others, I feel better, I'm happier. And so this is kind of the joy of giving, if you will. And so, as I mentioned, philanthropy is important because on a personal level, because the generosity that you're able to express through philanthropy, which really just giving your time, talent, and treasure to others, whether it's in your free time or whether it's to family members or friends in just the way that you live your life, science shows that it's core to the human experience. And so literally research shows that as generosity grows from a person, so does their well-being and greater happiness and health and their ability to understand the purpose of their life. And so that is why philanthropy is really important to personal well-being. So I have another quick poll question related to this. What ways do you personally most often give or extend love to others through your personal philanthropy? So the options are time, talent, treasure as in physical money, and treasure as in other tangible resources. Maybe you'd like to donate canned goods to your local food pantry, or you're maybe the first person to offer the coat off your back to another person. What are the ways that you most often express this personal philanthropy? And you can answer, I think, one or however many you want. I don't think you have to pick one. Yes, you do have to pick one. Just pick your favorite. And then once we have everybody's answers, we'll check it out, just like the last one. Awesome. So time. So when I was, and I know most of the folks joining us on this call today are high school students, but when I was similarly aged, and I'm not much older than you, time was also the way that I most frequently enjoyed and did go ahead and share my my resources with others. Now, I answered treasure, sorry, in terms of other items. And if I could have answered two, I would have said talent. And I just like to kind of participate in those ways. To me, it's more tangible. It's kind of, this is a side note, but if you take a class in fundraising, you'll learn that one of the great ways to fundraise is by saying, you know, like $5 buys, you know, a child at Riley Children's Hospital, an art experience while they're there. And that allows people to more actively give, some people to more actively give because they're able to visualize what they're giving. And that's similar to me. So just share that to say that. And then the next part, if I can get my PowerPoint to work here, is that philanthropy is important because it has a role in society at large. And so one of my other favorite parts in my experience at the School of Philanthropy was a class that I took towards the end of my education. And that class really taught me about the role that philanthropy plays in democracy. And so for the purpose of this part of the presentation, I've decided to call philanthropy the democracy strengthener. And so this class that I'm mentioning, one of the intro parts to it, one of the first things that you learn is about, and you read this, this piece called Democracy in America, which was written a very long time ago by Alex de Tocqueville. And I can be found quoting him from this particular piece on the weekly basis in my job now. But so my coworker, when I told her I was going to be presenting on this topic, she said, you have to include Alex de Tocqueville because you talk about it way too much not to include it. So I'm sharing this with you because to make the point that philanthropy is a key pillar to societal well-being, I'll share with you kind of what de Tocqueville says about the US. And so he was French, and so he came to the US and was just observing, supposed to be observing prisons, but what he really ended up observing was our voluntary associations, which now you can just think of those as nonprofit organizations. So he said, in the United States, as soon as several inhabitants so people, have taken an opinion or an idea that they wish to promote in society. They seek each other out and unite together once they have made contact. So you can kind of picture people getting excited about a cause and joining together, which still happens today in our country. And from that moment, they are no longer isolated, but have become a power seen from afar, whose activities serve as an example. And he goes on to say a bunch more. But the point here is that what makes us unique in our society, in the United States specifically with our democracy, is that we have a third sector. And so, as I mentioned in the first part, which was that philanthropy is a key pillar to personal well-being, I mentioned that it's a human nature type of thing. So it's not an American thing, it's a human thing. But the difference is that our country for a very long time has created systems and structures that support people expressing that human thing to the fullest degree. So we have policies in place at the national level, the state level, that support nonprofit organizations, support people giving their money. There's tax benefits to doing so. And we quite literally have the government and business as two sectors, and then a third sector of nonprofit organizations that isn't just a little sliver that you might find in some other places across the world where there isn't policy and structure for people to spend their full days every day having full-time jobs in philanthropy. But our country does have that. And so that is why a very long time ago, Alex de Tocqueville said, that this is the key difference to our democracy in America as an outsider. And that's why today we still are looked to as kind of this unique machine of sorts that has all of these very supportive structures in place, and organizations like Jill's help continue to advocate for those structures to remain and to grow and to get better. And so the question that I have is actually similar to what Pamela posed earlier, but I think we forget sometimes, or we don't realize because we're so used to being in a society and in a country that has these things, that we don't realize what kind of jobs really exist in philanthropy. And so we may know a lot of people who actually work in what would be considered a job in philanthropy, but maybe we didn't see it that way yet because we think of foundations like where I work or other things that are maybe more obvious, but we maybe don't think about the other jobs. And so the next poll question that I'm going to show has 5 or so jobs that at first glance, I want to know which of these jobs seems more philanthropic in nature to you just by taking a quick look. Which one of these makes you think of philanthropy most? I'm excited to see the results of this particular poll. Thank you, Margarita and team, for handling those questions for me. So not to create a cheating situation to be sharing these, okay, there we go, before they were pulled up. But a fun fact is that all of these jobs are actually jobs that my classmates at the School of Philanthropy a couple of years ago stepped into after they graduated. So the first one, for example, I had a classmate who works for Lady Gaga's foundation, the Born This Way Foundation, and she writes about kindness and happiness. And she literally was just published in a book that you can buy on Amazon with a bunch of other folks, including Lady Gaga. And the one that wasn't selected, which was a realtor in an urban area, one of my classmates who has, Pamela, you can correct me on this, but I believe she's pursuing or has completed her master's degree in philanthropy even, is actually a realtor and a photographer in downtown Indianapolis. And so she works with an organization, or she works for, real estate that is focused on access to housing and urban development. And so that would be a job in philanthropy too. That kind of job uniquely exists in societies like ours that have Philanthropy, the democracy strengthener, who allow us to work in those kind of jobs, to take the burden of societal needs off of business and off of government. And so moving into the last section here, as I mentioned before, I stepped into my role at the foundation as I graduated from the School of Philanthropy. And in my day job, I helped give away $5.5 million. There's only 3 of us who basically work to make those recommendations to our board of directors for those dollars to be spent in our community, in our county and city on nonprofit activities. But what I didn't realize until I'd been at the foundation much longer was that we have so many more roles than just funder. And actually we actively work to make sure that funder is equally part of our job as these other 4 roles. And so I just wanted to quickly share these with you because I was not aware of this when I stepped into this role, but I think it's important for us to see foundations, whether they're family foundations or a community foundation, a foundation within a company, as Pamela mentioned earlier, corporate social responsibility, that they play all of these roles. And so funder is pretty obvious, giving grants to organizations for community impact activities. So as I mentioned, that's what I'm maybe most known for in my role. But these other roles, like a convener, who basically that just means that foundations can bring partners and people together from across different communities or organizations for them to collaborate because they have these relationships with lots of different organizations by way of their grant making. They also can serve as an advocate. So because we sit in a level of power because of the funding that is associated with our role, we have the ability to kind of use our voices for change, and people listen because unfortunately money tends to attract people's attention. And so a lot of times that allows us to be maybe more of an advocate than some others, but be an advocate as a partner and an ally to those organizations and really fight for policies and decisions to be made, whether it's in our local government or at the state level, that support our partners and support their activities. The next one is resource share. And so that's just the extending of other resources, kind of similar to the poll question earlier of treasure as in money or treasure as in other tangible things. I would count that last one in this resource share. So just a quick example, we used our marketing budget during COVID-19 to pay for like public information related to vaccines and related to mask wearing through some other community offices. So it wasn't a grant, we just gave them our marketing budget and allowed them to use our regular dollars that help keep the lights on, not our grant dollars, in order to do something for public good. And then this last one is capacity builder. And so back to the idea of foundations having a unique view of the community because of their many, many partners that do many, many things. We have partners who, you know, help save the environment. We have partners who are public schools. We have partners who are theaters and symphonies. And so all of these different partners, we kind of have a unique view to see maybe like this organization does this thing in a really cool way, or they have this thing really down pat and they're good at it. And so we're able to potentially use some of our funding, not to just make sure that, you know, bills are paid of the nonprofit and that they're able to run their programs and you know, provide the shows at the theater, but that they also can be learning and growing on the back end of things and building their capacity so that they can do more on their own. And so all of these different roles are really important to philanthropy. As I mentioned, they're maybe a little bit unexpected because people think of funding. So my last poll question here for you is just which leadership role of philanthropy was most surprising to you out of these 5? So I left funder up there, but I also gave you the other 4 that for me were really unexpected. So I also answered convener. Thank you for, sharing some feedback here and telling us what you were most surprised by. I appreciate your participation and your time, and for allowing me to join you this morning and share a little bit about the importance of philanthropy, both as it pertains to us as individuals and to our communities. I am looking forward to chatting with you in the breakouts if you have any questions. And until then, I hope you enjoy what Mara and Jason want to have for you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kelsey. That was really fun and interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, it's time for another trivia question. So our question for now is, electric communications were discovered in which century? The 19th century, the 18th century, the 16th century, or the 20th century? And the correct answer was the 19th century. That's an interesting fact. And the prize goes to Angola Fist. Thank you for participating, and we'll get your contact information after the event.
Okay, now we're going to move into our breakout rooms. You're all going to be placed in one of the 2 breakout rooms. Click the join breakout room, and when the time is up, you'll be switched to the 2nd breakout room. You'll have 10 minutes to chat with our speakers, Pam, Jill, and Kelsey.
The direction of the more of the what your application should say and the skills that you should put on that application. And that would be the fact that you are involved in a youth pod, and that connecting that and your other volunteering that you do. I, over the course of almost 10 years at Indiana Philanthropy Alliance, know that most of you are involved in more than one thing. The youth pod is not your only gig. You guys are in sports, you're in other extracurricular. I was like the sports and theater kid, so I was that strange mix, and still am. But so I can tell you that those are connections that you'd want to put on your application in the survey portion of that application, and to connect the dots. Also, Pamela will talk about this. The School of Philanthropy often has scholarship opportunities available. And so, my colleague Julie is also on this webinar, and she's helping to lead our youth philanthropy efforts at Indiana Philanthropy Alliance now. And she's often sending out to the youth pods and to all there are actually about 30 youth philanthropy programs across the state of Indiana that are housed in community foundations or in connection with community foundations. So, so there's also a lot of scholarship opportunities there. And I will tell you, although because the School of Philanthropy was, because I'm older, the School of Philanthropy had not developed as many programs as they now have. I didn't look into that program. It wasn't as developed, it wasn't as available for me. But the main reason I was able to go to IUPUI, because my sister actually stayed home. She's a nurse, and she went to IU Northwest, which is located in Gary, Indiana. And the reason I could move away and go to school was because of scholarships. So Pamela, I was just saying, and you can jump into this, Pamela, but about scholarships and opportunities, but what should they be concentrating on and where should they go if they're interested in applying in the program?
Yeah, so, well, you can come to me, basically. I'm happy to talk to any students who would be interested in learning more about our school. We actually have some pretty phenomenal scholarships. This year we have a full cost scholarship that includes even books and a study abroad trip and your tuition and housing. But we have quite a few other scholarships as well, maybe that aren't quite as big as that one. So if money is a concern, there are lots of ways to think about that. And I'm happy to talk to you both about our program, what the classes are like, the kind of students that typically come to us, and then also, of course, any scholarship opportunities that are available.
And Pamela, this is Kimberly again. Would it be a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree? Is there a master's available? I think Kelsey mentioned that. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so we have a bachelor's degree, which is a 4-year degree. You can transfer though, like if you want to start at Ivy Tech and then, move into our school. And then we also have graduate certificates. We have a master's degree that you can actually do completely online. And we also have a PhD program. So if you're thinking really long term and you might want to teach in the field, that's an option too. And we're working on some additional certificate options, and then a professional doctorate, which is more for people who maybe want to be an executive director of an organization or want to work in the field in some way, but don't necessarily want to be a teacher in the field. So we have all of the degrees, and we are the only school of philanthropy in the world. So pretty cool.
And let's open it up to others. What questions do you all have for Jill and for Pamela?
I'll ask a question for the kids from Iowa. So if Indiana isn't an option, what kind of degree would you get to go into philanthropy if you couldn't make the philanthropy university work?
Yeah, so there are some kind of similar programs. You might look into things like public administration. Some people go into the liberal arts area. Some people go into social work, but there are a variety of ways to get at philanthropy. And philanthropy is involved in so many things in the community that you can definitely find different avenues to get there. But probably the most common is like a nonprofit management or a public administration or public affairs, those kinds of things. But we do have students that double major as well. Kelsey that talked earlier double majored with business, but we often have people get like women's studies, or Jill mentioned anthropology is an option. Political science is fairly popular. There's also events management if you want to do something related to sort of fundraising events and things along that line. That's another good option. And then our master's is online. So if like it's a distance thing and you don't want to leave your state, you could always also start with an undergraduate program and then later on get a master's degree.
And Julie, I mentioned that the program really wasn't quite where I needed it to be when I needed to look into my master's. I was leaving the museum field when I was starting my master's. I started it while I was working in the museum field and then finished it. It took me 5 years to finish my master's because I was working full time. And so that's why I paired my master's with nonprofit management. So there was a grant writing course in there. There was executive level, like if you wanted to lead a nonprofit, what would you need to do? I had already led a nonprofit. So in my mind, I had so much work experience that I figured out, okay, how can I pair this master's degree to have the nonprofit management? But the degree is actually museum studies. So.
What other questions are out there?
Do you have any other like clubs or programs you would recommend getting in at your school?
Did you say clubs? I'm sorry. Clubs? Yeah.
Clubs, extracurriculars.
Yeah, so we actually have our own club. It's called the Philanthropy Ambassadors Club, or we call it PAC for short. But they do a lot of like community service together. They also have like professional development activities, and sometimes we just do things for fun as well. But IUPUI has hundreds of clubs and organizations that you can join. And there are also many that are slightly or even fully related to philanthropy that aren't just through our school. So you would have a ton of options at a place like this. And what other cool thing is, you know, our school is very small. Like we have around 50 undergraduate students. And but then you have IUPUI, which is very large. There are 30,000 students here. So it's nice to be able to come to a school this small because everybody knows you, but also have the resources of a much larger campus. Like the library is wonderful. And we even have a philanthropic library within the library. And then of course, the extracurriculars and things like that are wonderful as well.
And I would say, you know, I think Kelsey kind of brought up, but looking at your community, what is available? Does your school have a service learning or service hours? Or, you know, is there set aside a group of students in your high school that are doing service projects? But also importantly, are there nonprofit organizations like the Rotary clubs, key clubs, things like that, that are also seeking volunteer hours? If you don't, some schools have also been starting some philanthropy clubs as well, and things like that. So there's always that opportunity. And then I want to put a plug in for advocacy. We have some programs around the state of Indiana, which are really cool, on young people advocating for greener communities and recycling and different things like that. So don't forget that using your voice and your time to advocate for causes you believe in, and finding out if those extracurricular activities and clubs are available at your school too.
Also, there's like United Way Youth Leadership Group and other things like that.
Yeah.
Are we in the main group now?
No.
Well, people need to know themselves.
Okay, I think we're getting major echo here.
Yourself, or that you've heard some of your former classmates go into. Can you tell us just a little bit more about some of those? Like, you know, I'm into Lady Gaga's music, so I'm always interested in that type of thing. But just tell us a little bit about some of the things that you know people are doing with their philanthropic degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. So I shared a few, but my class had a lot more folks than the examples that I shared. So there are other people who have graduated from the School of Philanthropy who are doing things such as working for zoos. So there are some folks working in like conservation and fundraising specifically for those zoos. One of my best friends from my program, she works for United Way in Indianapolis, and she is doing individual fundraising. So she basically works with people who are donors to the United Way and makes sure that they are engaged and that they continue to participate as a donor. A guy who I also graduated with, I don't know if he's still doing this, but Uber at the time of our graduation was opening kind of a philanthropic arm of their company, if you will. And so he was considering working in a role there as part of that, which is really similar to a foundation in the sense that they, make grants to the communities that they're active in. But still, that we all know Uber, that's kind of a unique role. I'm trying to think what other interesting things might be happening. Well, so my job before I worked at the foundation, I did my internship abroad. So I worked for a social entrepreneurship in South Africa who was focused on helping women in the community that we were in start Airbnbs with their extra space in their homes. And so actually became like the second largest place for Airbnbs behind New York City. And so just those kind of interesting things that fuels income for those women and kind of brings tourism to that community, which is an economic driver, and it makes other people's lives better. And so that's also kind of, I would say, a unique job in philanthropy.
Thank you. That's awesome. Hey, we have a message in the chat from Gracie and Eli. How do we effectively spread our purpose to get community involvement? So if we're passionate about something, how do we get others to engage with us around what we're interested in?
So one easy answer is to kind of find your tribe, which would be the people who share that passion for that cause. So sometimes it can be really challenging. I live in as I've mentioned previously, I went to high school in a really small town. I had 50 kids in my graduating class. So if I was passionate about something that had to do with like urban center, like, cities, then like to get people involved in my community on that would probably be kind of difficult. It would be easier for me to go, seek that out, go plant myself somewhere where the purpose that I kind of feel is similar to the purpose that people around me feel. But when it's something that people in your community or in your circle can rally around, I think what you can do to effectively kind of spread that to build community involvement is really figure out all of the different angles from that purpose. So you might be passionate about, let me see here, like scholarships because, or like education because your mom was a teacher, and so you just think that it's really, really important, and so you advocate for that, and you get really passionate about it. But for other people, the reason that they might kind of come on board to education is if you tell the story that education tends to help people get better jobs, which pay more and lead to kind of like the turning around of poverty in a lot of communities. And so you might find someone who's really passionate about poverty, but you can find that kind of link through education, which is what you're passionate about, because it's connected. And so I would just encourage you to, in order to kind of effectively share your purpose and drive community engagement on that, I would encourage you to figure out how your purpose, whatever the reason is you're passionate about it, try to see what the other reasons that someone else might be able to get on board for it, and try to make sure that you can kind of tap into that or figure that out about the people. And that will be an effective way to get them engaged.
I like your terminology about tribe. That is so good. I think it would be helpful, Kelsey. You've talked a little bit about your work at the foundation. Very generically, like, how do you spend your days at the foundation? What does that work look like? Just so we all have an understanding.
Yeah, great question. So because it's a small foundation, we do like everything. So like all of us do everything. So every day looks different. So when I first started, it was a lot of research because we started a new initiative focused on education. So that's kind of why my example is education. But so I spent like 2 months where almost my entire day job was just researching these other communities across the country who are using similar models for how they're addressing education in their community. But other days, like I built our website, we write press releases to share about our grant making. But the main thing that will never change is that my role is to be in relationship with our nonprofits in our community and then communicate and tell their story to the board of directors for the foundation. So they meet 4 times a year, and in those 4 times, they review grant applications and decide which ones to fund, which ones not to fund. Are they going to fund half of one or just pieces of them? And so my main role is to basically get to know all of these nonprofits who are going to write us grant proposals, seeking grant funding for their activities, and be able to make recommendations to the board as to who's ready for funding, which organizations maybe have great ideas, but their plan isn't ready, that kind of thing. So that is my day job, if you will. That is something that spreads across every single day. So yesterday, today, I meet with nonprofits and talk about their upcoming summer projects or their normal yearly operations. And our grant deadline isn't until April. So it's kind of like this never ending conversation. And that's the thing that gets me really excited, is being in that relationship.
Good stuff. You sound like the work that we get to do here at the Deco Foundation almost every day, that ongoing, never-ending conversation with grant seekers.
Yes.
It's a wonderful relationship. So we have a question from FIST members in Fremont, Indiana. What was the spark that drove you to have a job in philanthropy and not just be a community philanthropist?
That's a great question, because as I mentioned in my presentation, that was actually not my intention. So my mom was a business teacher. My dad just retired from a software company that he worked at in college, and then eventually was the CEO of a couple of years ago. And so my life has always been business. And so I went to college for business. I thought for sure I'd go work for business. And I really just was passionate about philanthropy. So I was like, this will be great. I'll learn how to volunteer better in my free time. I'll learn how to donate the money once I make it, because I'm going to work in business and make a bunch of money. That was my mindset. And so when I got the opportunity to kind of like interview for this internship, it was right after I got home from South Africa. And so before South Africa, was working in retail. So I had a job selling wedding dresses, and I loved that job, but I knew that that's not what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So I was hopeful that, and it was an hour from home. So every time I'd go to work, I'd have to drive an hour and then drive an hour home. So I was on the lookout for a job in my hometown the last year of college to try to kind of bridge the gap between college and a job. And that's how I landed in that role. It just kind of became, the foundation had never had staff before. So it's 87 years old, and it always just had a part-time director. So it never had people who could really be like the hands and feet of the organization. So they were looking to bring someone on, and I was looking for a job, and someone I knew happened to be on that board of directors. And so they said, hey, I know this 21-year-old girl who has a degree, is about to have a degree in philanthropy. Maybe we should interview her. So that was how it happened. And then what kept me around, though, is this piece of relationship building in my community, which is really important to me. And so it wasn't an active decision. It kind of just happened. And I think I would encourage you that will probably be how it goes for you, more than likely. And so just roll with it. It tends to work out well. I see there's one last question. We have just a few seconds.
Yep.
But college students can study abroad doing philanthropy. Even if you study something different, you can do a service project study abroad. Or what I did was I started out on my own. So I found a program and I worked with my university to get it, to make sure that it counted for credit. But there's many opportunities, and most colleges have a study abroad office. So they have full-time people who will help you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Wonderful. And we'll make sure that you all.
Bear glasses.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today. Now let's move on and discuss communications with Carrie. So I'm going to go ahead and let her take it away.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Katie, if I could just have you mute your line, I'm getting some feedback. Okay. Or Margaret, there we go. Excellent. Before we dive in, I am going to ask people if they are comfortable just turning their video off for a moment and taking like a 60-minute stretch, or not 60-minute, 60-second stretch break. I know my legs could use a little stretch, so please do that, and we'll get started in about 60 seconds here. Okay, I will invite folks to turn their videos back on so I know you're ready to begin. Hope you enjoyed a chance to stretch your legs, stretch your arms, get the blood flowing a little bit. Okay, looks like we have most folks back. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie McCann-Botel. I'm president of the Iowa Council of Foundations and really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you all this morning. I am the last leg of our 2-hour session here, so please bear with me and engage in the chat to keep this interactive. I've been asked to talk about communications across youth philanthropy and specifically about 3 things related to communications. 1, what are our goals in youth philanthropy and our communications? 2, to offer some ideas for improvement around some challenges that were lifted up from this group. And then finally, we'll talk about grant review meetings and the importance of communication during those grant review discussions. So before we dive in, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my youth philanthropy history and experience in youth philanthropy, which I think is in kind of 4 different chapters. So the first chapter was when I joined my youth philanthropy group in 8th grade. I am from Southwest Iowa. I don't think we have any youth answering the call of the community or YAC students on this morning, but that was my youth pod. And I served in that group for 5 years and really just fell in love with the process of community service and grant making and really helping my community, and knew that I wanted to make a career out of it. So I studied nonprofit management at the University of Northern Iowa and then went on to graduate school at IUPUI's School of Philanthropy, which we've heard a lot about this morning. During graduate school, my second chapter of youth philanthropy was being involved with the DECO Foundation's FISH group. So I was at that point one of the adults, or I considered myself more of a big kid at that point, engaged with both youth and adult partnerships in thinking about how we could best support youth pods. After graduate school, I had a job at a community foundation here in Dubuque, which is where I live now in Iowa. And I had the opportunity to be one of those adult navigators for a group and work with our YAPPers program. We have a lot of interesting acronyms in this world. So we had about 25 high school students and we did fundraising and then made grants in this spring. And the current chapter and how I'm engaged with youth philanthropy now is through my role at the Iowa Council of Foundations. We are really committed to supporting youth philanthropy across the state. 1, because we have a lot of members that are community foundations, private foundations, or corporate foundations that support youth philanthropy programs in their communities. So we see this as an extension of how we support our members. But 2, we know that youth philanthropy is really a place where young people get excited about serving their community and being engaged in philanthropy long term. I'm a product of youth philanthropy. I've been working in philanthropy ever since. So we see that as a really important investment to help young people see connection to their community. And we know that you all will be lifelong servants in your communities on boards of directors, maybe in staff positions or as philanthropic givers. So it's really, personal to me, youth philanthropy, but it's also important to our mission at the Iowa Council of Foundations as well. Jill told you about the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. That's essentially what our organization does in Iowa. So Jill and I work closely together in our national network. It's good to see you, Jill. And I think with that's the little short version story of my career in philanthropy and youth philanthropy. So I thought that might be helpful background for the conversation. So talking about communication goals, I'm just going to breeze through kind of the who, what, why, and how we communicate. And I want you to keep your youth philanthropy hat on this morning, even though some of these lessons will likely apply to your coursework or those of you who are getting ready to go to college. I think all of these communications lessons are good across a lot of different types of work and service opportunities. So the first question is really, why do we communicate? And I've listed a few different reasons here why we communicate. And I think in youth philanthropy, we actually use all of these. So if we're thinking about our work in youth philanthropy to inform an audience, we might be telling people about our grant cycle opening up or telling them about our mission and what we do in the community. If we want to share feelings, we might be talking about a successful grant that we've made in the community and the impact that it's had on people or on the community more broadly. If we want to imagine, it might be an opportunity for us as young people to lift up the needs that we see in our community and ideas that you all have for how to make your communities better places to live, work, and play. Influence is something that you likely use in your meetings. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the grant decision meetings, but it could also be a chance for you as young people in your community to really influence decisions that are made outside of your youth philanthropy table. So I knew that when I was in high school, we were really interested in getting high school students engaged with our city council and our mayor. So outside of our youth philanthropy group, a few of us who had met there decided to work on a new initiative to get a mayor's advisory council started. And we presented that idea to the city council. So I think influence is an important one as a young person to consider because people will listen. People will listen to what young people have to say. You just have to really be willing to raise your voice. So I encourage you to think about the role of influence that you can play both inside your youth philanthropy group and outside it as well. And then finally, we communicate to meet social expectations. So obviously, if we're all sitting in a room, which hasn't been as frequent lately, it's just common nature to be in conversation with people. So you want to be prepared to talk about your role in youth philanthropy and what gets you excited about the work in youth philanthropy. So I shared a few examples, but I would invite you to use the chat box to share some other examples of how you're communicating in youth philanthropy. And maybe if you could flag which goal you're trying to accomplish in those communications. So I'll give you a moment here to do that. I have the chat box up here on my other screen. So let me just take a look and see what's coming in. So I have a comment here from Fist, and it says, our group uses band to stay connected. And that must be something I do not know about. So I don't know if Fist can unmute and maybe just talk about what band is and how you're using that in your organization.
Band is a like communication app that people use for all sorts of things. I'm in it for several other groups, including ours, and it really helps keep everyone connected because you can post things on it to the whole group and to several people in several situations.
Excellent. So I was having a little trouble hearing. I'm not sure if others were, but what I gathered is it's an app that you can use to communicate within a group, and you can post information so your entire group can see all of that information at once. It looks like somebody just shared a link in the chat box. If your organization isn't using Band, maybe that's something you could consider. It looks like there are some other apps that people are using. One's called Remind. So please take a look at those if you haven't found the benefit of an app yet. I think that's a really great idea to communicate, especially with people your age. My age might be a little bit different, but I think one of my lessons that I'll share a little bit later, the most important thing is to communicate with people the way that they want to be communicated with. And it's very clear that using cell phones and text communication and conversation through an app is something that works really well for people in your youth pods. So make sure that you're leveraging that technology as a really good way to stay in touch with each other. So please check those links out, and thanks to those of you who shared those. The next question is really how we communicate. Of course, we know that we verbally communicate, we communicate in writing, and then we communicate visually. So I've just shared some different ways that I communicate in my job, but you likely also communicate in your youth philanthropy groups. Again, everyone has a preferred communication style. So when you're working with another person or with a broader group, I really encourage you to think about what your preferred communication style is, but also how best you can communicate with others. So when I worked with our Yappers group at the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque, I spend all day on email. So I sent a lot of emails, but I quickly discovered that email was not the way that my students wanted to be communicated with. So I adapted and we started a group chat and text. So that seemed to work better. Your preferred communication style will likely evolve over time. I think right now it's probably text, but just an encouragement to really be well versed in all the different communication styles as you get ready for college, as you get ready for a career, as you're interacting with older adults maybe more frequently. You'll need to adapt and adjust and use other people's communication style. And I think the lesson here is we can't just communicate one way. We have to be able to communicate in a lot of different ways to reach different audiences. So what exactly do we communicate? I listed stories first because I think that's the most important thing and most compelling way to communicate with people. And actually stories came up in one of our small group conversations. And the idea was that we need to be able to share our story about youth philanthropy. So what difference are you making in the community? You've maybe heard about the elevator pitch and how you can quickly convey information about your organization to someone who doesn't know about your organization. And the idea is that you would be able to tell them about your mission and the time that it takes to take an elevator ride. I think that is a really, really important skill to develop, not just in terms of youth philanthropy, but any message that you want to communicate. Clarity and being concise are really, really important in effective messaging and making sure that your stories and your message are heard. So the other thing I really like to think about is that once you have a good story, don't just use it once. Use all the different communication channels to share that story out. So if you have a successful grant impact story, think about how you use it with all those different styles of communication. Maybe you share about it on your social media. Maybe you write about it in your newspaper through an op-ed or a news release. And then maybe you verbally communicate it at your annual grant awards ceremony. So it's okay to take a good story and latch onto it and repurpose it for different audiences and different mediums. The other ways or the other what's of what we would communicate, of course, our conversation and dialogue in our meetings and preparations for our work in youth philanthropy. We also have the fun job of communicating good news, good work that's happening in our community, but sometimes we also have to communicate tough or challenging news. And that might be in terms of a grant declination or providing feedback to a grantee who didn't have a strong proposal. So these are all sort of nuanced skills that we have to develop, and you can't talk or deliver a message the same way every single time. You have to really be tailoring your message based on what you're trying to communicate with that audience. So think about that in your tone of voice, think about that in the way that you're framing your message if it's in writing. And that again is a skill that will serve you well in your future, not just in your work in youth philanthropy. Finally, we communicate with grantees about deadlines. We also talk about feedback through either award notifications or decline notifications. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then finally, praise. I think it's really important to recognize if somebody's submitted a really strong proposal to you. Tell them that. Don't just say, yes, we're going to award you a grant. Say, this is what we really liked about your grant. This is why we're investing in your program. I think I've already made my point there about the storytelling, so I'm going to move along to the next slide. So I don't want to spend too much time here other than to say we communicate obviously on a daily basis, but in thinking about how you're communicating in your youth philanthropy work, consistency is key. So you don't just want to talk about your youth philanthropy work during your grant cycle each year. You want to be talking consistently throughout the year about what you're doing, how you're engaged in your community. And the reason that that's important is one, it supports community awareness, but two, it also supports awareness in your schools. So other students are interested in what you're doing and aware of what you're doing and might be more likely to join and participate in your organization. So consistency is key, and also quality. So you don't want to over communicate and just communicate for the sake of communicating. You want to make sure that you have a really important message that you're sharing. So one tool that I use for our communications in our office, and I've used it in other jobs, is just a content calendar to map out all of the different communications that we'll be sharing. We're going to do a press release in September as we're getting our year started. We're going to do a video story in October. That will just help you really be planful about your communications so you know you're consistently getting your message out. And it can also help you think about gathering those stories in a consistent way throughout the year. So you aren't stopping in the fall and thinking, ooh, what do we have to say? You're thinking throughout the year about preparing those communications and messages to push out to your community and to other students in your group. So who do we communicate with? I've listed a few ideas here. These were groups that I remember talking to when I was a student in my youth philanthropy group, but I'd invite you to use the chat box to just weigh in on which of these groups feels the most challenging for you to communicate with right now. And if you'd like to share a little bit more about why, I'd be really interested in hearing that. I got some feedback in advance of the session, so we'll talk some about this a little bit later. But I'd be interested to hear what your experience has been. I know for me, I was always most nervous about talking to community partners and the board of directors when I was in my youth philanthropy group. One, I saw those board of directors as people who held a lot of power and were people that I knew were friends of my parents and leaders in our community. So that felt like a lot of extra sort of pressure and stress in those conversations. And then community partners, I thought that was a really challenging group because some of them knew us really well, knew the Youth Answering the Call of the Community group really well, and others didn't know us at all. So trying to talk to that group more broadly felt like a challenge to me. I see in the chat box school leaders and parents to add those to the list. I think absolutely that was a miss on my part. I remember speaking to both of those groups very clearly in my youth philanthropy experience. So my advice to you is to figure out who on this list feels the least challenging and to do a lot of practice with that group. So even today, when I'm getting ready to meet with my own board of directors, and it might be a tough or a challenging conversation or something that I'm not sure will be well received by everyone in the board, I practice that conversation before I go into the boardroom. So I know that I'm prepared both for the conversation and any questions that might emerge. So the group you might be most comfortable with could be one friend that you have in your youth philanthropy group, or maybe it's an adult guide or a navigator in your group. Use that opportunity to talk with those people and practice what message you want to convey so you're ready to communicate with those other groups. And you honestly cannot practice enough. I have a professor from college who talked about practicing his presentations that he would lecture on several times before he delivered them in the classroom. And you could always tell that preparation really paid off in his presentation. So practice, practice, practice. I see another chat coming in here about board of directors and also grantees. And the concern or the challenge, I guess, is that those communications are really formal. I think that's a really good point. And I would say there's a time and a place for formal communications. So you need to practice that skill and how to communicate formally with people. And those formal communications help build relationships. And once the relationships are established, you have an opportunity to move into more informal conversation as well. So certainly respect the formal processes that you need to follow in terms of those communications. And usually there's examples that you can build from. So if it's a presentation to the board of directors to present your grant slate, that that's been done every year before, right? So there's probably a template or a communication tool that you can use to prepare for that conversation. So build on past success, follow the formality, but then really use those opportunities in formal communication to build relationships so you can bridge to that informal communication. And then a final chat here that I'll lift up is that applicants are a challenging group. It's a struggle to get a wide range of applicants that are willing to fully commit and make our group a priority. So I hear this. I hear this from community foundations in our network all the time, that community foundations are the best, kind of the best kept secret in communities sometime. And I think youth philanthropy is certainly that as well. So instead of thinking about individual applicants, I think that would be, again, a good opportunity to think about your broad and consistent communications with the general public and with those community partners that you're working with. And that consistent communication creates awareness, and it also helps people really understand what your organization is doing and what you want to fund. So that could be a good place where the content calendar might help get applicants really knowledgeable about your group and what your priorities are and submit stronger proposals. Okay, so those were some of our communication goals, and hopefully that can serve as just a frame for the rest of the conversation. This next section here is, I wanted to lift up some of the challenges that were shared with me from the organizers and talk about some ideas and suggestions for improvement. But I know that I do not know all the answers, and I know that you guys have a lot of really great ideas. So when I move to the slides for suggested improvements, if you have an idea that I'm not sharing or that's not being shared, please lift that up in the chat box if it's something that's worked well for your group. So the first challenge we're going to talk about is there are not opportunities for everyone to speak. And I think this was specifically at our youth philanthropy meetings. And what I will tell you is this is not a challenge unique to youth philanthropy meetings. This is a challenge in all meetings and something that I still experience in my day-to-day work as well. Some suggestions and ideas for solution would be to break the larger group into small groups for a part of the conversation. Oftentimes people have a much bigger, a stronger confidence level in talking with a small group, and then maybe designate one person from that small group to report back out to the large group. So it's a good way for everyone to be heard, but not everyone has to take that step of sort of speaking in front of the full group if that's not something that they're super comfortable with. Something that we did in my youth philanthropy group in high school is we rotated meeting facilitators. So we didn't have like a president or a chair of our organization. We had rotating meeting facilitators. So everyone had an experience of leading a meeting and being able to have their voice heard at the table. So really like that suggestion. And I've used that in some other groups as well. And it also supports ownership and buy-in in the mission of everyone really feeling like they are leaders within the organization. Another thing we used in my high school group is a talking piece. I'm sure some of you have maybe tried this. We had a fuzzy ball that we threw around, but it's just a physical, tangible tool that you can toss from person to person, and whoever's holding that piece is the speaker at the time. The other thing that this helps to do is cut down on sidebar conversation. I don't know if that's a problem in any of your groups, but it was a huge problem in our group. We had a really chatty group of students. So the talking piece was really helpful to kind of solve for both of those challenges. And then finally, use technology, which we've already started to talk a little bit about, but the pandemic has really taught us that we can communicate in new ways using technology. And I don't think that any of that is going to go away once we emerge from the pandemic. I think we're going to continue using Zoom. I think you'll probably continue using those apps that you've been using. So really get comfortable using that technology space and think about ways to hear all voices using technology. Again, I'll invite you to add any other suggestions into the chat box that you may have. So I don't see any yet, so I'll keep moving. The next challenge is that we waste a lot of time in meetings. And again, this is not unique to youth philanthropy meetings. I have a lot of adults that would tell you this is one of their biggest challenges and frustrations. And I do some board governance training, and this is like the #1 thing we talk about, how to make our meetings more efficient. So the first thing I would suggest is on your physical meeting agenda to put time limits on each of the topics that you're going to discuss. So if you know that it's your grant review meeting and you need to reserve the majority of your time in that meeting to talk about grant review, don't add 10 other things to the agenda that day. Maybe add 2 other things and make sure that they're limited to 5 or 10 minutes or however much time you have for those items, and then reserve the larger portion of the meeting time for your grant review discussion. The second idea is to use a consent agenda. This will really just depend on how your group is structured, but if you're using committees or smaller subgroups to make some decisions and do some work outside of your full group meetings, you could ask for those groups to submit a written report out of what they decided in those meetings, and everyone could read that before the meeting and approve that just very quickly without having to sort of rehash all of those conversations. This has been something really helpful for a lot of the organizations in our state and a lot of the groups that we've worked with. And then finally, I just mentioned committees, but utilize those committees to move work forward. I think one of the reasons we get stuck wasting a lot of time in meetings is we've got way too many people in one room trying to make a decision, and consensus building takes a lot of time. So if there are decisions that a smaller group of students in your youth philanthropy group could make on behalf of the broader group, utilize committees to help move some of that work forward in between those larger group meetings. It'll help save everyone a lot of time. The next challenge is that I don't feel like my voice is heard or represented in discussions. The ideas or solutions are to really champion the things that you feel most passionate about. So maybe there's a grant application for an organization that you really care a lot about. You might volunteer to take the lead on that grant review for that cycle, so you can make sure that your voice is heard about the thing that matters most to you. And the other suggestion here is just to make opportunities to talk with others before the meeting. So you don't, your voice matters a lot in the time in the meeting, but it really matters in the time outside of the meetings as well. So build relationships with people and talk with people about the things that are important to you, both during and before or after the meetings. So really the encouragement here is to use your unique voice. No one has your same lived experience. No one has your same passions or perspectives. So obviously speak up at meetings or use the other communication tools that we've talked about, and talk with your peers about what you see as important needs in your community and how you can think about addressing those needs through grant investments or volunteer programs, opportunities to connect with that cause. Frame issues from your individual experience or perspective. Talk about why things are personal or important to you. That's a really compelling way to get people to buy into your ideas and your thinking. And then the final note here, and I was really not very good at this when I was in my youth philanthropy group. It's a skill I've had to work on developing, but that's challenging people's views. And it really is okay to do that. And it leads to leads to better decision making, really. My husband is like the #1 devil's advocate on everything. So he helps me practice this almost daily. But it's a good skill to develop to really help think about advocating for a specific position or stance on an issue. And I know we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to move into our last section here, which is I've been asked to talk about the grant review decision process. So the best advice I have is to really get on the same page with everyone in your youth philanthropy group. And that starts with making sure you have shared language and clear priorities for your grant making work on the front end. That is communicated in your grant guidelines with applicants, but it also comes back into play when you're making your decisions. So you don't just publish the grant guidelines as an external document. You have those and use those during your grant review process alongside usually a rubric that helps everyone stay focused on what you're trying to accomplish. So as you're making your decisions, encourage you to think about sort of layers of alignment with your grant priorities and sort of layers of check boxes that applicants need to meet. So first and foremost, every applicant needs to meet these due diligence requirements. Usually your host community foundation or private foundation can help you vet some of that if you have any questions. The second is that there needs to be alignment with your stated priorities and your grant guidelines. And then the third, and this is where sometimes conversations, people need to bring their own perspectives to the conversation, is around how compelling the case is. So I just listed some ways that you might be able to label or flag grants to help you think about how compelling a case is. So if there's a clear opportunity for impact in your community, that might rank more highly than a grant that doesn't build that case as effectively. The last one there is big bang, small buck. So it might be a small dollar investment, but you think it has the potential to be really transformational for your community. So hopefully some of those might just be helpful for you to think about as you prepare for your grant review process. My second piece of advice here is to capture reasons for the decline. I think it's really easy to just send a form letter that says your grant request was denied, come back next year. But really thoughtful and smart grant makers invest a lot of time in coaching applicants, both on the front end and the back end of the application process. So if there were specific reasons why you chose not to fund an organization, invest time right then. Invest time in the declination letter to say, we didn't fund your proposal because of XYZ reason. Because it didn't align closely with our priority areas. We didn't think that it met our due diligence requirements. The more detailed you can be in the decline letter, the stronger proposals you'll get the next time around. And finally, just some tips and tools here for a successful review. I think most of you are probably using an online grant review software at this point. I know Foundant is a very popular one with foundations in Iowa. Using that software, or even you could build something in a SurveyMonkey to capture actual grant scores, is a great way to get people's input before the grant review meeting. And you can use those grant scores as a starting place for your grant decision meetings. So the example would be, if you come together and you've got $15,000 to award, but the requests total over $30,000, could a starting point be to take the 3 lowest scored applications off the table and prioritize your time talking about those who scored highest? Again, that's about making the most of your time and using everyone's time wisely. I mentioned already having one member take the lead on an application and sort of present it at the full meeting. That's a good opportunity for people to have their voice heard, but it's also really great practice for presenting a proposal and why you want to fund or decline it, and can get you prepared for those board of directors meetings as well. And then finally, just again, encourage you to really have healthy debate at these meetings. My grant review committee meetings in all of my jobs in youth philanthropy, and then in all of my jobs, are actually my most fun meetings, because people do get really engaged and really passionate about the causes that they want to support. So just really encourage you to lift your voice up and not be afraid to sort of challenge other people's views or opinions. It's, again, a skill that will serve you well moving forward. Sharing my contact information here. I love talking with students about futures in philanthropy and careers and coursework in philanthropy. So if I can ever be of help to any of you, please let me know. And just want to offer my thanks to everyone for spending time this morning talking about youth philanthropy, and a special shout out to my Iowa friends who joined the conversation this morning. And I will turn it back over to our hosts.
Thank you, Carrie. That was very informative. Does anybody have any other questions for Carrie? If not, it is almost time for us to sign off, but we have a couple more things to share. I'm going to welcome Kimberly Schroeder from the DECO Foundation, and I'm actually going to hand it right over to you, Kim.
All right, so hopefully everybody can hear me. Thumbs up if you're hearing me. Awesome. I would like to take a little time. Kelsey talked about being a resource sharer. And so we have the opportunity to share some of the resources that we've gathered here at the DECO Foundation over about the last 30 years of youth philanthropy. So before I start, I'm going to take a quick minute and introduce you to someone kind of important to us. The name DECO comes from Mr. Chester E. DECO, our founding father. You can find our website here at decofoundation.org. And to learn a little bit more about Mr. DECO, you can go to About Us, our founder, and many of the youth pods. I've talked to you about the opportunity to learn more about Mr. DECO and his work from our video on Mr. DECO. You can find it here on this page. It might be a good way to even start the year for a youth pod, is to learn a little bit more about this gentleman that felt investing in our communities and especially in young people in our communities. He's a pretty neat guy. But the thing I really wanted to show to all of our guests on today's call is if you would go to our initiatives and go down to youth philanthropy. Well, and then over on the sidebar, we have an area that's called Youth Philanthropic Resources or Youth Philanthropy Resources. This is where I just mentioned we've gathered all of the information over the years that we've used to talk about youth philanthropy. The first step is called Strain Archives, and probably a little bit more information about youth pod specific. But those of you that are not a youth pod are more a youth philanthropy group, I think anybody could use this to talk about the work that you do. So Carrie and Kelsey, I think both mentioned elevator speeches. A lot of that information could be found in these brochures where we talk about youth philanthropy. Here's a little bit about how we started our youth pods at the DECO Foundation, when all of the youth pods were started.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kimberly, but I'm not seeing you share your screen.
Oh gosh.
That's what happens when adults take over technology.
Yes, of course. Well, let me get back to you guys and try to share again. How about that? Look, Carrie's smiling at me really, really big.
Wonderful, we can see it now.
So I'm on the Youth Philanthropy page. Here's the resources, including the how we started youth pods and when each youth pod was started. I want to talk a little bit about the second section or segment. It's more from young people and what they've learned through youth philanthropy. So here is a table created by a young person that said, this was my experience when I joined a group in 8th grade, and maybe kind of as a freshman, what you might experience, and as a senior. So it's been really helpful to us. Again, those of you that aren't youth pod specific, but youth philanthropy, I think you could use it for your needs also. We've done some surveying of folks that have went through the youth pod system. And there's about 1,000 young people now that have been sitting in your seats. We've asked them what they've learned, and it's recorded in some of these areas, including a video, a word for what I wanted to be. And then the last section I wanted to talk about here is some things that might help you do your work in youth philanthropy maybe a little bit better. This talks a little bit about youth pods, the mission, and what each one of our roles are in youth philanthropy. This is some terms that folks use. We talked just a few minutes ago about the formal part of our work in youth philanthropy. This might help just a little bit. How to apply to the DECO Foundation for your youth pod. This is an interesting connection. Our group in Whitley County called Hands has done some education around youth philanthropy. This is a connection to their videos that talk about youth philanthropy. And then we started youth pods based on the Michigan Council of Foundations and some of their work. So this is a link to some of their great information. And then the last thing is actually a curriculum that we have found around youth philanthropy. It's called Teen Philanthropy Cafe. So all of these things are available to you. Use them, share them, make them your own if you'd like to. And then I just want to go back because I didn't do a good job of talking about our founding father. Here's how you find that information. I'm sorry, our founder should be pretty self-explanatory, but there's the website for you. Please, if you have any questions or need hard copies of this information, we're glad to provide them to you. But I hope that you'll use them, Carrie, use them with your Iowa folks, folks down in Alabama, folks from around the Indiana state. Just use them, share them. We love them and love that you would use them.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind bringing the screen back to the full group. Awesome, thank you. Okay, everyone's doing it. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. I've been dying to ask that question all day, or say that. So I'm Katie Mullins. I work with Pulse of Noble County, which is in Northeast Indiana. And I wanted to share with you some very exciting news about next year. So think about a year ago when everything was starting to shut down, and hopefully that time's gone pretty fast. I can't believe it's been a year since like everything's started shutting down. So now if we think about next year and how quickly time will fly by, and we'll be in the same spot next year, but we're hoping to have everyone all together. We understand the importance of gathering people together. We have heard you loud and clear that you want to be together. And as Carrie mentioned, it's just common nature to communicate with one another. And we feel that the past retreats, youth pod retreats that we've had, when we gather all the youth pods together in one location, have been very beneficial. So we have tried successfully, I feel, to have them virtually. We have, I believe, more than doubled our numbers from the event in October of participants. So we're hoping that this time next year, so early March, mark your calendars, we can gather everyone in Northeast Indiana, in Noble County, in one of our towns, Kendallville, Indiana. So we have a great building there that would be able to house a conference for us, and we can show you a little bit about the work that Pulse has been doing in Noble County, and finally get to see everyone in person and network and build those important relationships. So you will have a survey after this event today. So put in there if you have any ideas that you'd like to see next year for our in-person event, or even sooner. Please make sure that you share those as well. Oh, and Carrie just put in the chat, the Iowa Youth Philanthropy Conference is also returning in 2022. Yay! So things are looking up. So hopefully everyone's staying safe and healthy, and things just get better from here on out. Thank you for joining us today.
Trail and Keys, how many people do you have? Can you put that in the chat, please?
Okay, so our final participation opportunity question is, communication is the process of what? Keeping in touch, entertainment by electronics, broadcasting, or exchanging information. And whoever gets that first, if you could put it in the group chat.
The numbers.
So the correct answer is exchanging information, and let's remember to exchange information with one another from different group pods. And congratulations to Sadie from Pulse. She is the prize winner, and we'll contact you after the event.
Alrighty, so thank you all for sharing and taking the time today to be with us. Make sure to take this information you learned to your next UPod meeting. Share the ideas, discuss what you have heard, and how and why you might implement new and different philanthropic practices. We'll send out a link to our recorded event and a survey via email. We want to hear your feedback on today's event. And I just want to remind our Pulse members to stay on the Zoom, please. And that is it.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.